कर दिया कि नहीं किया अभी?
Live. Okay, so I'll introduce everybody. So hello everybody, and thank you so much for again joining in another episode of our webinar today. And today we have Dr. Ashutosh Srivastava, who is a clinical psychologist and have been working in this field for almost for 20 years now. And more than that, we are so grateful for him to be here and also for another important thing for making AHA therapy happen. Thank you so much for one day thinking that how you can make all psychologists' life little bit much easier and efficient. So we are again very grateful for that. And also one of the best feature which we have on our platform is our assessment. Everybody who have used our platform and using our platform, they always talk about how great that feature is. So, to talk a little bit more about it, to educate us more about it, we have today Sir here. So, I'll not take much time. Sir, again, thank you for being here. And now um, I hand over mic to you and you can take it forward.
Thank you, Aprajita. And it was very mindful that you thought about such a important subject for today's webinar to be discussed. Because there are a lot of misconceptions about using psychometric testing, especially among Indian psychologists. Some of those misconceptions are intentionally induced and some are genuine. So we'll try to address them as well. How across situations, across wellness settings, these psychometrics are used or supposed to be used. Like many often we hear that only clinical psychologists are entitled to do testing. Counseling psychologists should not do testing. So these kind of sometimes ill-intended messages and sometimes miscommunicated things often create a lot of confusions among people who want to do testing or who are actually doing testing. So we'll understand the scope and definition, how and where we are doing psychometric test, what is the Indian legal and regulatory framework about testing in different settings, what kind of test should be used by whom, and in the time of AI and new digital technologies, what are the ethical considerations, what are the different competency norms that need to be practiced, what are the challenges of psychometry in India. So we'll discuss all that. So let's quickly wrap up with some basics, some fundamentals to set up the context. So when we say psychometrics, because this webinar may not be watched by only psychologists, so a lot of general people might be, people from industry might be watching this. So for easy understanding, psychometrics is the science of measuring some psychological variable, whether it is intelligence, personality, aptitude, attitude, any kind of psychopathology, wellness, motivation, emotion, any such psychological variable. When we try to measure that, the science of this measurement is called psychometrics. So this is very, very simple. And the instrument which is used for these measurement must be standardized, reliable, and valid. So why do we do these psychometric testing? So first and most common objective is to standardize, quantify. So let's say somebody says that I'm very sad. How sad? For me, very sad is different than for you. I'm highly motivated. So, what does it mean, highly motivated? Somebody is intelligent. So, let's say both of us are intelligent, but is it same or is there any difference? So, the primary objective of any psychometric is to quantify these psychological variables, then use them in diagnosis and test for the purpose of treatment planning, identifying severity, treatment outcomes monitoring, making career vocational guidance related choices, making choices related to relationships, and so forth and so on. So when we say psychometric, so definitely the question comes, which is a good psychometric, which is a bad. So a good psychometric tool will have these properties like reliability. Reliability means consistency. So if you use the same test, it will give you the same result 1000 times. That is the reliability of the test. Validity means if you're testing it for intelligence, it is not telling you about motivation, it is telling you only and only about intelligence. So validity of test means that this is measuring what it should measure. Then standardization means for Indian population how the score should look like. For normal population, how the score should look like. So this process is called standardization. Then definitely cultural sensitivity and practice utility. Like there are tests with 500 plus items. So they have everything: reliability, validity, standardization, maybe cultural sensitivity, but utility in practice is questionable. You can't do it for 5 patients in a day. So if we try to categorize these tests into various groups, so there are five major primary groups. One is intelligence and cognitive abilities. Second is personality inventories. Third is projective techniques. Fourth is neuropsychological battery, and fifth is psychopathological checklist. So these five category of tests are mostly used in clinical settings, but there are many more which are used beyond clinical conditions, beyond clinical settings. So before we go to test, we see how the wellness landscape is there. So NIMHANS, one data from NIMHANS says that nearly 200 million people live with um, mental illnesses. And if we want to identify them, the only way is psychometric. If we want to screen them out, nearly 80% don't get treatment because they don't know they have this illness. Most of them. So, psychometric screening tools are the only way to screen them out in the most cost effective way. Let's say if we do these tests on the entire population, we'll be easily able to identify that who are vulnerable. There's no other way. And this is the opportunity, but the challenge is that Mental Health Act 2017 and DPDA Act 2023 have made various obligations on the practitioners for using these psychological tools. So whether it is digital platforms, school counseling setups, EAP setups, clinical setups, the demand is increasing. Like recently, UGC has said that all higher education institutions must have a mental health facility where they should screen all their students. So demand is increasing. But interesting thing is that India is not a country; it's a continent itself. with 29 states, 22 official languages, so diverse socio-economic context. So even if we want to blindly copy Western tools, there are a lot of limitations to that. So demand for having indigenous tools, indigenous technology is very, very high. So whether it is clinical setup, whether it is school, college, whether it is workplace, or NGOs or community settings, and now new age platforms which are using digital or telepsychiatry or telemedicine for mental health, they all require the psychometric applications or psychometric tests. But the problem is we don't have culturally adopted good Indian tools which can offer or fulfill the need of the entire requirement. Definitely, there are tools, there are instruments which are being used, but they have limited scope and context. Like most commonly used tests in different category are like for intelligence and cognitive, we use Mullins test, we use SPM, we use MESIC, we use VSMS. For personality, we use MMPI, NEO, EPQ, 16PF, Big 5, MBTI. For psychopathology, we use PHQ, GAD, DAS, HDRS, PANAS. For projective, we use Rorschach, TAT, house tree person, sentence completion. For neuropsychological assessment, we have PGI battery, we have enhanced battery, we have AIMS battery, and there are other tools also. For aptitude, we use lot of tests. There is one tool which claims to be psychometric, but it's not that. That is DMIT. It has no grounding in psychological theories, psychometric principles. A lot of international national bodies have condemned it, but still people are using in the market. Then for well-being, we use WHO tools. For indigenous Indian tools like PGI, mental health questionnaire, SDHI, and there are a couple of more tools. So for different settings, we can see these tools are there. Now, if you want to use these tools, we have to keep the legal framework in mind. So, Mental Health Act ensures right to confidentiality, informed consent. The person who is taking this assessment, their qualification, like for being able to certify somebody's mental capacity or somebody's mental illness, it has to be RCI registered psychologist. But to provide somebody's career choices, helping somebody sail through their relationships, it's not the RCI's requirement. So we'll come to this little later. But RCI's mandate is limited to disability. And PWD Act includes mental illnesses as disabilities. Therefore, in the condition of severe mental illnesses, only clinical psychologists should be engaged. But that is the only rider. A lot of conditions where clinical psychologists have no exclusive claim. So there are a couple of more issues like advanced directives. So test findings may inform advanced directives, like practitioners must document um, and respect somebody's expressed preferences during the period of capacity. Then there are state and central mental health authorities which are constituted. So they also have mandate to review the clinical standards, including testing protocol and all. And no psychometric instrument, whether good or bad, should be used for coercion, seclusion, or punitive learning. Forced testing also is not accepted. It has to be voluntary. It has to be willful. So it's very clear in RCI Act that registration of professionals who are working with people with disability is mandatory with RCI, and clinical psychologist in disability or mental health setting must be RCI registered. Unregistered practice is a criminal offense. It's very, very clear. So if we look at the test administration hierarchy, there are A level tests which are used by HR professionals, teachers, career counselors. The level B test, which are used by counseling psychologists, psychology master students, mostly for non-clinical purpose. And then level C tests, which must be used by RCI registered clinical psychologist or maybe psychiatrist in some cases if they have that training. And the law says there is huge penalty for administering level C tools without registration, not for level A and B. Then digital platforms must have a RCA registered clinical psychologist for all the tests that are being used. Supervision process must be documented and auditable, especially for an AI scored assessment. Because there is a lot of sensitive personal data that has to be protected through IT rules 2011. For data collecting process, data storage, data transmission, all that has to be documented, and IT Act has enough provisions to ensure the data safety. So in clinical setting, if we see MMPI for psychopathological profiling, Bender Gestalt test for neurological screening, PGI is actually an indigenous test, Rorschach methods, BPRS, BDI, HAMD, these are all tests which are being used. And these tests are very, very helpful in clinical management. It has proved a lot of researches. But the problem is, like PGI mental health questionnaire, it has been tested and validated only on North Indian samples. So its generalizability is very, very limited. You can't say that it will have the equal results in south of India or eastern part of India or northeastern part of India. Then there are multilingual limitations that most of these tests have either been validated for English speaking population or Hindi speaking population. But there are regional languages. There are people who can understand normal conversational Hindi or maybe English. But having the full context is only possible in their mother tongue. And we don't have most of these tests in local languages, in different Indian languages. Many government facilities don't have access to licensed material. So it's being used, pirated, and photocopy and all that. So these are all challenges in the Indian setting. And then for school, there are tests like IQ test, learning disability screening. They cannot be done by normal school counselor or school psychologist. For these, they require an RCA registered clinical psychologist. But for psychosocial well being, for career guidance, for general screening, all psychologists should be able to do that. The legal ethical obligation says that for any minor to be tested, parental consent is essential. It is mandated by POXO Act, it is mandated by Juvenile Justice Act, it is mandated by other records also. Right to education says that the results of test cannot be ground for denying somebody's admission or somebody support services like counseling and rehabilitation, special education for that matter. Results must be shared with parents in understandable language, not in technical terms. School counselors must be qualified, minimum masters in psychology to administer at least level B tests. And no data should be shared with teachers until unless there is a written consent by the parents. So these are the guidelines we must keep in mind. Then in workplace scenarios, there are various tests which are being used, whether it is a professional fit and role match, whether it is wellness screening, whether it is for leadership development, team building, whether it is return to work capacity evaluation for some post psychiatric leave, some kind of substance abuse. So these are the permissible use within the organizational setup. So using mental health test may result in denying employment for some people, which is not possible, which is not allowed. So you can't deny employment on the basis of mental health test results. Forced testing cannot be done without consent. Test results cannot be shared with supervisors without consent. Using brain fingerprinting or DMIT kind of things for hiring, which has no scientific validity. And then retaining somebody's test data beyond agreed retention period. So these are all legal prohibitions for use of testing, EAP settings. So it should be kept separate from HR files. It should not be mixed. So separate data management is essential. Management should only be able to see anonymized and aggregated data, not the individual data. EAP providers should be third party to ensure data neutrality. And pre-testing briefing and post-testing briefing is mandatory. And the standardization of the test battery should be annually reviewed because new data is coming every year. So these are the some scenarios where we need to be watchful about how to use in corporate wellness settings. Then in community and NGO, there are a couple of tests like WHO, 5, RDID, GHQ. These tests are used for various community use like child care institutions, prisons, HIV ICTC units, autism screening in toddlers like Anganwadi SHGs, for geriatric care, for migrant workers. So these tests are being used. So basically, this is for gatekeeping in community setting, not for very intense clinical use. And when literacy is low, you can take verbal consent, not that you have to take in community settings that written consent is not mandatory, but consent should be there, even though it is verbal. And results, if there is any significant finding on the test, must lead to referrals. The person who has indicated some psychopathology must be immediately referred to the nearest full-fledged clinical facility. That is the mandate for community and NGO setting. So if we look around this, that 500 million plus people are actually using um, internet in India. 40% Indians report reluctance to see a therapist. They don't want to see a therapist. What will he do? He'll just talk, and many of them don't know actually what it does. So though we have DPDA, but RCI has no mandate, or no government regulator has any mandate specific to AI powered psychometric testing platforms. So this is the context, but we see a lot of opportunities that this is scalable in tier 2, tier 3 city with nice interface and good scientific tools. Adaptive testing can be used. Real-time scoring and algorithm report generation can be measured. Longitudinal tracking is possible, like we have in AHA therapy, a lot of these already built in. And it can be integrated with wearables and digital biomarkers. The risk is that in digital setting, we all know that for any test to be conducted, a rapport building is very, very important. So, because here no physical rapport building happens, so it may inflate test anxiety in some people. Then there is connectivity issues for some people. Then AI may have, there is no existing evidence, but because these AI models are trained on Western data mostly, so they may have some algorithmic biases while scoring the scoring the psychometric tools through AI. Identity verification is very difficult. That in physical capacity, if I'm testing you, it's only you. But in digital capacity, I can fill on your behalf. So it's very difficult to establish that the real people are responding to that. And lack of emergency protocol for acute distress. That is the common risk factors we can see on digital platforms today. So legal obligations for the platform is to display their RCI registered psychologist name, registration number. Granular consent before data collection. Confidentiality and no data sale to third party, that is mandatory. Crisis referral pathways post assessment should be there. And server side encryption for all psychometric data, that is mandatory. And thankfully, we have integrated all of this into AHA therapy already. So these are the issues for Indian standardization of these Western imported tests. Item bias analysis, cultural adaptation, Indian norms are not being used, reliability reported, construct validity and criterion validity. These are the issues where we need to work in the mission mode at the national level, big projects, for top 20 clinical tools across 5 regions kind of things should be done. And in fact, it has already started to some aspect, but it is too late and too little. So, for adoption, we need to address these challenges that clinical equivalence is very, very important. And if you see, sometimes you don't find the exact word in the other language. There is some words in English and you can't find the exact Hindi word for that. Or if you have some word in Hindi, you can't find the exact Telugu word for that. So linguistic equivalence is big challenge when we adapt these tests. Then conceptual equivalence is another. It has the literal translation available, but contextually it's the entire thing, entirely different thing. Then metric equivalence, then scalar equivalence, then functional equivalence, and then ultimately normative adoption. So these are the challenges when we think of adoption of these tests in the Indian context. But a lot of good efforts are being done by the national institutes, and we can see some very good developments. Like there is one tool developed by uh, NIPID. So it's an Indian developed intelligence tool from the scratch, or an enhanced tools for SLD or PGI memory skill. So there are a couple of good tools being developed by the Indian institutes, but this challenge still remains. So like these are Indian developed psychometric tools like PGI memory scale was developed by PGI Chandigarh. Then we have tools from Enhance. Then we have tools from University of Delhi and multiple researchers. So people are making efforts to develop tools in this domain, adopt these tools, test their cultural sensitivity. But I will again say that this is too late and too little. A lot of work has to go into this. So AI powered psychometrics is the new frontier in India, rather in the world. So there are good platforms, good tools, good models available, and they'll improve day by day with new language models coming into picture. But there is still possibility of training data biases because they are trained on Western samples. Um, explainability deficit, like AI based assessments may not be defensible in court. It may be good for clinical or counseling work, but not in the legal context. Models upgrade or degrade without revalidation. No substitute for clinical formulation. AI is just a decision support, so ultimately you need human interface to be able to do that. And sometimes performing these tests on AI could be distressing for the people. So these are the challenges we must, not as individual or as a individual company, but as an industry, as a larger group of professionals, we must look around these and comply with the regulatory requirements. So remember always autonomy and informed consent is the must. We must avoid jargons. The client must get the results in the most simple, understandable language. Whatever we do, it must serve the client, should be in the best interest of the client. Any kind of labeling, stigmatization, diagnostic foreclosure should not happen. Testing must not discriminate based on caste, gender, language, or any other criteria. We should use only standardized and properly normed tests. We should not administer tools beyond our capacity level, and confidentiality is a must. So, these are some ethical principles for psychometric administration, whether physical or digital. We must keep it in mind. So, informed consent and confidentiality is very, very important. And in case of literate population and at least uh, how the test will be used, we must take a written consent, no just verbal consent will be accepted. But there are a couple of instances where mandatory disclosure is there, like cases of suicides, child abuse indicators, court order assessments, notifiable diseases, third party harm, data breach, and inspection rules must be explained before assessment begins. So these are also to be mentioned that these are the circumstances where your confidentiality might be compromised to comply with the legal requirements. So clinical psychologist, this is a very important question. There's a lot of misconception around this. So clinical psychologists should be able to use all A, B, C level tests. Counseling psychologists are limited to A and B category tests. MAMSC psychologists who have no specialization, no higher degree, must be supervised while doing A and B level tests. And school counselors and HR professionals should only limit themselves to level A test. But all of them can do some level of testing. So saying that only clinical psychologists are authorized to do tests is an incomplete statement and factually incorrect. So we can see these are some malpractices around this: administering without consent, photocopying the license test, over pathologizing through test, using DMIT as a scientific assessment, sharing data with insurers, employers, and using outdated test versions. But we need to be mindful while working in these things. So the best practices framework that we are practicing in AHA therapy and we recommend is like pre-assessment. You must do your homework about finding the appropriate test, verify your own competency level or the person who's going to do the test, and obtain informed consent before you do the test. Then for assessment, maintain standardized conditions. Then for scoring and interpretation, apply normative data appropriate for this specific client. And report must be given in a very, very accessible jargon-free language. For future direction, I believe that this is where we should go, that we should have a national psychometric standardization body, preferably led by government. If not by government, then at least by the fraternity. Open access normative database, which can be used for validation, training new models, mandatory literacy training for all psychology students, AI psychometry regulatory sandbox should be developed, school psychologist cadre must be developed, and we can think of an EAP psychometric certification also. So this is the future direction. These are the policy recommendations that we can say we should look for. So it's a science, must be practiced by the scientists, and we have a legal framework which places clear obligations on practitioners who are administering the psychological test. And we also agree and believe that the standardization gap is real and consequential. So we need to do a lot of research. Digital and AI powered psychometrics is the solution to the current problem, the scale gap that we have. But we need to have more structured ethical framework to manage, control, and regulate the psychometric testing. So this was all that I had today.
Thank you so much, sir. I think one of the interesting thing about this webinar was where you told us about how a clinical psychologist and a counseling psychologist, they can use which kind of psychometric assessment and how they
Yes.
can help their clients. Because yes, instinct is one thing that I think, or I have feeling that this can be the problem, but for how long? When we use a psychometric, it verbalizes, it gives us a base. So thank you
True.
so much for enlightening us with your knowledge. It's um, and again, we are really grateful for creating AHA therapy. And now, when we are talking about AHA therapy, would you also like to share with people who have joined how they can use the feature, the assessment feature which we have on AHA platform, and how it is different and how it can make their practice little easier and more efficient?
Yeah, so you can see that for different qualification level, we have some riders that this is the test you can use, this is the test you cannot use. But this is actually very, very time saving also. So for the test we used to conduct manually, same test was taking, let's say, an hour for administering and writing the report. But now it can be done just on a click of a button. So life is easy, it has the context, because in AHA therapy, what we have tried to build is the context. So no information is lost, it is tracked over time. So you can see the trends, you can see the progress, you can find the correlations from the clinical history, from the MSc to the psychometric assessments to the homework that the client is doing, and a lot of other data points. So what the best thing is that system recommends that these are the tests you must do. Still, you have a choice to use them or not as a therapist. But the blind spot that I forgot to do this test does not exist. And many a times you don't have some of the tests. So maybe those tests are present in the AHA therapy database and you can use it from here. So it really makes our lives easy. Give us a lot of time to work on therapy, talk to the client, do the real therapy than doing just the manual, mechanical, mundane work. Yeah,
Thank you,
I
sir.
welcome.
Thank you so much, sir, for answering that. And thank you, everybody who have joined in on Sunday morning. It's really nice to see you, everybody here. And we will be again back with another webinar on next Sunday. So till that time, thank you so much, everybody, for joining in. Thank you so much, sir,
Thank
for
you.
being
Thank you.
here. And we'll see you next Sunday. Bye bye. Take care,
Bye.
everybody. Bye, sir.